Goblin units, which are sort of expendable, all have a trait called ah! That was a little overboard. Let me do that again. Big fantasy armies waging war has been part of fantasy and fantasy gaming for as long as there's been fantasy and fantasy gaming. But there's never been an edition of D&D that featured rules for fantasy battles in the core books, and I think there's a good reason for that. I think a lot of players sort of expect a fantasy battle to be more like a dramatic backdrop for their own heroic deeds. In other words, a lot of players like the idea of a war, but they don't actually expect the armies to be important. They expect their character to do cool stuff while a war just sort of happens in the background. And for those folks, you don't need rules for warfare, just dramatic descriptions of battles, and that's fine. But some players, and I am one of them, think it's actually pretty cool if the armies are important. I love the fantasy of my character raising an army. I love the idea of military units with keywords like elite, heavy, elven, archers, and the idea that each of those keywords means something. So when that unit shows up in the battle, you're like, oh shit. I like the idea that which units we field and the actions we take are important. And I like the idea that they are my character's units and that they behave differently because they work for me. I don't just want to play a medieval fantasy war game. I want it to make sense in the context of the RPG I'm already playing. I also think it is a very powerful tool for telling stories in the fantasy world. We have run a ton of battles using MCDM's new warfare system, and the stories and images that come out of them are epic. The first time I demoed this system to our art director, who has played a lot of war games, in his first battle he laid a trap for me, and I, the designer, fell for it. And I almost fell for it again. The goal is, it is fun to play, it fulfills the fantasy of your character commanding armies, and it gives DMs and players just a ton of cool storytelling opportunities. Hey everybody, Matt Colville here, and as you probably know, the PDF for Kingdoms and Warfare is out. The warfare system is now available for players and DMs to use. We hope you like it. I know it would be very useful for people to see it in action, and we intend on making a video showing the rules in play, but this is just me explaining how the rules work because some people learn by reading, some by playing, and some just like having someone explain it to them. So this is a unit. It is the basic element of your army. When you found an organization, your domain gets 4 free units, and then you can take domain actions during intrigue to raise more. Each unit has a bunch of different keywords. One of them is ancestry. Ancestry doesn't have a massive impact on your stats, but it does determine which cool abilities the unit starts with. All elves, for instance, have eternal, which means they ignore the terror that fiends and undead cause in other units. And there's a whole deck you can order on our store with 64 new special units in it, but the reason I bring this up is because you don't need those special units. There are 54 ancestral units in the book, along with another 24 domain units, and a handful of units you can summon with the new codices in here. You could use this system every week for months just with the stuff in this book. And once you've played the game a couple of times, it's pretty easy to homebrew new units. So when you found your organization, you can muster 4 units, but they have to belong to an ancestry your DM thinks it's reasonable you'd have access to. If your party has humans and elves in it, then it's reasonable your domain could muster human and elf units. And you can start with any units from those ancestries as long as they are all tier 1. Units don't have a cost, you don't spend points to buy them, but they do have a tier. Tier 1 is all the basic units. You get more interesting or powerful or specialized units in tier 2 and 3, and then tier 4 and 5 are... I don't think there are any tier 4 or 5 ancestral units in this book. You need the special unit deck for that. They are very powerful, and you'd only ever expect to see like 1 tier 5 unit in any battle, and that would be a very high level epic battle. So you start with 4 tier 1 units from any ancestry that seems reasonable to your DM, but what kind of units are you gonna muster? Well, you got 4 choices because there are 4 types of units: infantry, artillery, which at tier 1 also means archers, cavalry, and aerial units. And you should already have a pretty good idea what these units are just from those categories. A unit's type tells you who it can attack. Infantry can only attack other adjacent units. And if you use the warfare rules from Strongholds and Followers, this is the first big difference. Strongholds and Followers has all of these follower charts in it, which you can roll on when you build your stronghold and whenever you improve it. You might get a retainer or a special follower like a dragon. That would be cool. But you might get a new unit. And since we were awarding folks new units, I included the warfare rules we had at the time, which were in an early prototype stage. Those rules were entirely abstract. You didn't track the position or movement of any unit, and as long as you sort of, used the rules in the spirit they were meant, it basically worked and people had fun with it. But as soon as folks started using these rules competitively, things fell apart. Now, that doesn't surprise me. We only included the pre-alpha rules because we wanted folks to have something to do with their new warfare units. But probably the biggest change between those rules and these finished rules is there is now a battlefield. This is it. Pretty straightforward. 2 sides. Each side has 4 rows of 5 columns. And there are rules in here for adding more rows and columns if you end up with a big army. But there's also advice in here not to start big. Folks see these rules and they get excited and they want a big battle. But I very strongly urge you to start small. Rows are called ranks, and each rank has a name and a function. Your front rank is your vanguard. Only infantry can deploy here. Deploy means start the battle here. After the battle starts, units can move into other ranks, no problem. So if the vanguard is for your infantry, and infantry can only attack other adjacent units, then most battles are going to start with 2 rows of infantry going and trying to break the other rank. The next rank are your reserves, and you can put artillery or infantry here, and your reserves are the only rank where you can stack units. So if you have a bunch of units that don't fit on the battlefield, you can have some in reserve. Only units on the top of a stack can be attacked, and only the top unit can activate to do anything. The next rank is your center, and this is where your archers deploy at the start of battle. Archers can attack any unit. Doesn't matter where they are, which means archers are really good at finishing off units with only 1 casualty remaining that might be hard for your infantry to reach. You also have your front, which isn't a rank exactly, but it's your vanguard and the entire enemy side of the battle. So your infantry can leave your vanguard and go after the enemy artillery, and they are still in your front. This becomes important later. Then you have your cavalry and aerial units, which belong to no rank. They do not go on the grid. We just usually put them off to the side somewhere. Cavalry units can attack any other cavalry units, no problem. They can't attack aerial units, obviously, and they can attack any units on the grid as long as those units are exposed, which means on the edge, basically. A unit is exposed if there are no other units between it and the edge of the battlefield. The exception to this is your center and reserves. As long as you have units in your front and your rear, the last rank, then your center and reserves are protected from cavalry. So you're going to want to park some units back here in your rear to defend your archers against enemy cavalry. But obviously, you don't want to put your best units back here. You need them in the vanguard. That's what levies are for. Levies are infantry made up of like farmers and other peasants who have no formal training. They can attack and defend like normal, but they never level up. They always disband at the end of every battle because they've got, like farms and shit to go take care of. Finally, aerial units are tough like cavalry, but they can attack any other unit. It's pretty hard to muster aerial units, like there are no tier 1 or tier 2 aerial units. Might be a good idea to use your domain's espionage skill to see if your enemy has any aerial units, because if so, you're going to need some archers. Okay, so you know the rules for who can attack who, but how do you attack? You target a unit and make an attack test against that unit's defense. Simple. Attack versus defense. That's step 1. If you succeed, you automatically inflict 1 casualty and you proceed to the power test against the target's toughness. So this isn't exactly like D&D, it's 2 rolls. The first one is, are my soldiers well trained enough to execute this attack maneuver, or are the enemy too well trained to let that happen? Then, if my troops are good enough and the attack succeeds, we see whether my unit is physically powerful enough to hurt the enemy, or are they too tough for our puny weapons. That's it. 2 rolls. Attack versus defense, then power versus toughness. And if the power test succeeds, then you inflict the damage listed on the card, which is almost always 1, but really powerful units like dragons and giants can do 2 or even 3 damage on a successful power test. But even normal infantry can upgrade their equipment to do more damage. Just costs some money. Each unit has a size, which represents how many casualties it can suffer before it breaks, just like your character has hit points that used to literally mean how many hits you could take. Size is represented by a die. Most units are size 6, and you just put a d6 on the unit card with the 6 facing up. So when you suffer casualties in battle, you tick the die down from 6 to 5 or from 4 to 3. The first time in each battle a unit is reduced to half its starting casualties, it is diminished and has to make a morale test or it suffers 1 more casualty. So morale is important. Not only do all units make a morale test when they're diminished, anytime units have battle magic used against them, they have to make a morale test. A lot of monstrous units have attacks that force a morale test. Like undead and demons have an ability called harrowing, which forces opposing units to pass a morale test before they can attack them. Only once, though, not the end of the world. That's what elves are immune to, by the way. They don't get freaked out by demons and undead the way humans do. Units also have traits, which were a lot of fun to design. Like goblin units, which are sort of expendable, have a trait called "Ah!" which lets them inflict casualties on all adjacent units when the goblin unit breaks. So like the goblins all freak out and run everywhere and just attack everything nearby in a panic. There are lots of fun traits like that, like Gulp, which lets the Frog of War devour an entire unit as long as it's already diminished. Or like Dwarven levies have hard hats, which gives them a bonus to defense against aerial units. There's a lot of fun flavor in here. But traits can also be just cool, like the Shock Troops trait that gives you a bonus to attack and power every time you diminish an enemy unit. That could add up quick. Or Pike Training that gives your infantry a bonus when defending against enemy cavalry. There's like 130 unit traits in here, all of which appear in some unit somewhere, either in this book or the unit deck. Units also get new abilities called martial advantages based on your class. You command these units, even if your character is not literally on the battlefield. They train with you, and that grants them new abilities. Like Paladin units are righteous and gain a bonus on their next attack after they succeed on a morale test. Spellcasters gain battle magic, unique scrolls and wands they can distribute to their units that are used up at the end of the battle. That way your units still get the benefit of having a spellcaster commander, even if that commander is busy fighting the enemy realm's officers. There's even support for the Illrigger in here. Illrigger infantry are all death commandos. Every time your infantry succeed on a power test, you don't just inflict casualties, you force that unit to make a morale test or suffer another casualty. Illrigger infantry demoralize the enemy. There are over 70 different martial advantages in here, and I had a blast designing them. One of the most fun things I did on this book. Units can execute maneuvers. For instance, anytime an enemy unit leaves a space adjacent to one of your infantry units, maybe because it broke and ran, or maybe just retreated one space, your adjacent infantry can attempt to follow up and move into that space. Remember when I said I played some battles with our art director and he laid a trap for me? Well, he retreated one space and I followed up, which is exactly what he wanted, and he surrounded and squished that unit. I was so excited to use that maneuver that I almost fell for it again. Follow-up is something only infantry can do, but all infantry have that maneuver. Lots of units have their own unique maneuvers. Each maneuver has a DC telling you how hard it is, and each unit has a command stat, which in the abstract means how good is this unit at executing complex instructions, but really it just means how good are you at maneuvers. Units need commanders, and you can write which character a unit belongs to on the card here. Characters can only command a number of units equal to their proficiency modifier, which when your first level is +3, so 3 units. The fact that each player can only control like 3 to 5 units helps keep things manageable. The DM controls all units on the enemy side, but they still have to belong to an enemy commander. So you run battle just like you run combat. Everyone rolls initiative. But you deploy your units on the battlefield in reverse initiative order. So the commander with the worst initiative places first, allowing everyone else to react to them, and so on until whoever won initiative places last, which can give them an advantage since they get to react to everyone else's deployment. Once everyone's deployed, you act in normal initiative order. Each commander activates all their units each turn. So if you control 3 infantry, you activate all of them. Each unit resolves its action before the next unit goes, so you can't have 2 units both move, then both units attack. You can activate the units you control in any order. Each unit can attack and move and attack, or move and move, or do only one of those things, or do nothing, which is basically the same as your character in D&D. Unless otherwise stated, units can only move 1 space with a single movement. This might all seem overwhelming, but if you roll initiative and start deploying units and then start taking actions, it all becomes real straightforward and, I think, fun. When I demoed this system to Jason, our art director, we ran a battle between his barbarian units and my sorcerer units, and at first it seemed like my battle magic was going to hold the day. But his very badly wounded barbarians flanked my infantry and just chewed through all my archers like nom 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 nom, which I thought was hysterical. Not only did the units he fielded matter, his deployment mattered, his choices in combat mattered, and the fact that he was a barbarian, so they gained barbarian martial advantages mattered. And at that point, I felt like we really had something special and cool. But whether I was right is up to you. The system is robust enough that you can use it to run your own fantasy wars all on its own, but me talking for 10 minutes isn't the same as seeing it in action, so we're going to upload some videos of folks using these rules to give you an idea of how they work in play. In the meantime, you will soon be visited by more running the game videos and a general MCDM update video since we've been working on a lot of stuff. And unless you hang out in our Twitch chats, you probably do not wot of these things. If you have questions about any of this, I very strongly urge you to come by our Discord. People have already fought battles with these rules, and there are tons of people ready and willing to answer your questions. Until then, peace. No, not peace. War!